The dust cloud swirled across the barren landscape as Deirdre Robbins struggled to keep her footing against the relentless wind, her parched lips cracking and her vision blurring as the world tilted beneath her feet. It was 1878 in the unforgiving New Mexico territory, and she had been walking for 3 days since the stagecoach robbery that had left her alone, without water, and miles from civilization. Her knees finally buckled beneath her, the rough earth rushing up to meet her as consciousness began to slip away. Through the haze of her fading awareness, she heard the steady rhythm of hoofbeats approaching. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the merciless sun. Strong arms gathered her from the dust. "Safe now," a deep voice murmured as she was lifted against a solid chest. "You're safe now, madam." When Deirdre next opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a narrow cot in a small, sparse cabin. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and the worst of the dust had been cleaned from her face and hands. She tried to sit up but fell back with a groan as her head spun violently. "Easy there," came that same deep voice. "You've been through quite an ordeal." A tall man moved into her field of vision, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the window behind him. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, a faded shirt, worn denim pants, and boots that had seen many miles. His face, partially shadowed by the brim of his hat, revealed kind eyes and a strong jawline softened by concern. "Where am I?" Deirdre managed, her voice a painful rasp. "My ranch, about 20 miles northeast of Cimarron." He poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and gently supported her head as she drank. "Name's Daniel Sutton. Found you collapsed out on the flats. What in heaven's name were you doing out there alone?" Deirdre took another sip of water, treasuring each drop as it soothed her parched throat. "Stagecoach robbery, 3 days ago. The bandits took everything, my money, my belongings. They left me behind when I fought back." She closed her eyes against the memory. "I've been walking ever since, trying to reach the next town." Daniel's expression darkened. "The Collins gang. They've been terrorizing travelers through this territory for months now." He set the cup down. "You're lucky to be alive, Miss Robbins, Deirdre Robbins." She attempted to sit up again, more slowly this time. "I was traveling to Taos to take a position as a schoolteacher." "Well, Miss Robbins, you're welcome to stay here until you've recovered your strength. My ranch hand, Miguel, has gone into town for supplies. When he returns, we can discuss getting you safely to Taos." Deirdre nodded gratefully, then noticed his left hand. For the first time it was missing 2 fingers. He caught her gaze and flexed the hand self-consciously. "War injury," he explained simply. "Shiloh, it doesn't slow me down much these days." Over the next few days, Deirdre regained her strength under Daniel's careful attention. His cabin was modest but comfortable, with 2 rooms separated by a curtain. He had given her his bed and taken to sleeping on a bedroll near the fireplace. She learned that he ran a small cattle operation with just Miguel and occasionally hired extra hands during roundup season. On the 4th morning, Deirdre awoke feeling almost herself again. She found Daniel at the wooden table, bent over a ledger. "You're up early," he commented, glancing up with a smile that transformed his weathered features. "Feeling better?" "Much," she replied, moving to the stove where coffee percolated. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, Mr. Sutton. I should make arrangements to continue to Taos." Daniel closed the ledger. "The stage won't come through for another week, and you'll need funds for your passage." Deirdre's face fell. She hadn't wanted to think about the practical problems facing her. The bandits had taken everything, including the letter of introduction to the Taos school board. Without it, and arriving weeks late, would they even believe her story? "I could work," she suggested, "to earn my keep and my fare." Daniel studied her thoughtfully. "Can you cook?" Deirdre nodded. "Very well, in fact, my mother made sure of it." "Then we have a deal. Miguel's cooking is liable to kill a man, and I'm not much better. You cook, help around the cabin, and I'll pay you a fair wage plus your stage fare to Taos when the time comes." That evening, Deirdre prepared a proper meal for the first time in Daniel's kitchen. The supplies were basic, but she managed to create a stew that brought an appreciative gleam to both men's eyes. "Dios mío," Miguel exclaimed after his first bite. "Señor Daniel, we must convince the señorita to stay forever." Daniel's eyes met Deirdre's across the table, and she felt a curious warmth spread through her chest at the admiration in his gaze. "The food at the boarding house in Taos will certainly be a disappointment after this," he agreed quietly. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Deirdre took over the cooking and household tasks, freeing Daniel and Miguel to focus on the ranch work. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Daniel would read aloud from one of the few books he owned, mostly poetry and history, that he'd carried with him since the war. One afternoon, a week into her stay, Deirdre was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Shading her eyes against the sun, she spotted 3 riders coming up the dusty trail toward the cabin. Something about their approach made her uneasy, and she hurried inside to find Daniel's rifle. She had just taken it from its place above the door when Daniel rode in from checking the north pasture. He immediately sensed something was wrong from her expression and dismounted quickly. "Riders coming," she explained, handing him the rifle. "3 of them." Daniel nodded grimly, checking that the weapon was loaded. "Stay inside," he instructed, positioning himself by the corner of the cabin where he had a clear view of the approaching men. The riders slowed as they neared, taking in the sight of Daniel standing ready with his rifle. The leader, a heavy-set man with a greasy black beard, raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy there, rancher," he called. "We're just passing through, looking for a place to water our horses." "Water trough is over there," Daniel replied evenly, not lowering his weapon. "Help yourselves and move on." The bearded man dismounted while his companions remained on their horses. As he approached the trough, Deirdre, watching through the window, gasped. She recognized him, one of the bandits who had robbed the stagecoach. "Daniel," she called in a low, urgent voice. "That's one of them, from the stagecoach." Daniel's posture stiffened, but he gave no other indication he'd heard her. The bearded man was leading his horse to the trough when Daniel spoke again. "I hear there was a stagecoach robbery last week. Colin's gang left a woman to die in the desert." The man's hand drifted toward his holster. "Ain't that a shame? Dangerous territory out here." "Indeed it is," Daniel agreed, his rifle unwavering. "Especially for stagecoach robbers who wander onto my property." The standoff lasted only seconds before the bearded man made his move. But Daniel was faster. A single shot rang out and the bandit howled in pain as the bullet struck his gun arm. His weapon fell to the dust as his companions drew their own guns. Miguel appeared from the barn, shotgun raised. "I would not," he advised the mounted men calmly. The injured bandit clutched his bleeding arm, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, rancher." "The regret's all yours," Daniel replied coldly. "Now get on your horse and ride out, and tell Collins that Sutton Ranch isn't a place he wants to visit." After the riders disappeared in a cloud of dust, Deirdre rushed outside, her heart pounding. "You're certain they were from the Collins gang?" Daniel nodded grimly. "The one I shot is Collins' right-hand man. They'll be back, and with more men." He turned to Miguel. "Ride to the Hendersons. Tell them what happened and ask if they can spare a couple of hands. Then continue to town and alert the marshal." That night, Daniel insisted that Deirdre sleep in the root cellar beneath the cabin floor. "If there's trouble, you stay hidden," he instructed as he showed her the narrow space, stocked with preserves and root vegetables. "And leave you to face them alone. I can handle a gun," she protested. "I've no doubt," Daniel replied with a small smile, "but this isn't your fight." "They left me to die in the desert," Deirdre reminded him, her chin lifting stubbornly. "I believe that makes it very much my fight." Daniel studied her face in the lamplight, his expression softening. "You're a remarkable woman, Deirdre Robbins." Something in the way he said her name made her breath catch. Before she could respond, he turned away to check the windows once more. The night passed without incident, but tension hung over the ranch the following day. By noon, Two of the Henderson boys had arrived to help, bringing news that the marshal was organizing a posse to hunt down the Collins gang once and for all. As dusk approached, Daniel positioned his small force strategically around the property. Deirdre refused to hide in the root cellar, instead taking up position inside the cabin with a shotgun Daniel had taught her to use. The attack came just after nightfall. Gunfire erupted from the direction of the corral, followed by shouts and the panicked whinnying of horses. Deirdre peered through the window, her heart in her throat as she tried to make out what was happening in the darkness. A shadow moved across the yard toward the cabin. Deirdre raised the shotgun, then lowered it as she recognized Daniel's familiar stride. He slipped through the door, breathing hard. "Collins and at least 6 men," he reported grimly. "They've set fire to the barn. Miguel and the Henderson boys are trying to contain it." "What can I do?" Deirdre asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Stay low and keep watch on that window," Daniel instructed, checking his ammunition. "They'll likely try to." The window on the far side of the cabin shattered as a flaming torch sailed through, landing on the rug. Deirdre rushed to stamp it out while Daniel fired through the broken window. A cry of pain told them his shot had found its mark. "They're trying to smoke us out," Daniel growled, helping Deirdre beat out the flames. "We need to." The door burst open, and 2 men rushed in with guns drawn. Daniel tackled the first, driving him into the wall. The second aimed at Daniel's back, but Deirdre swung the shotgun like a club, catching him across the face. He staggered, and she brought the butt down hard on his head. He collapsed in a heap as Daniel subdued the other attacker. "Behind you," Daniel shouted suddenly. Deirdre turned to see Collins himself filling the doorway, pistol aimed at her heart. Time seemed to slow as she stared down the barrel, certain her last moment had come. A deafening shot rang out and Collins jerked backward, a look of surprise freezing on his face before he crumpled to the ground. Behind him stood the marshal, smoke still curling from his revolver. "Seems I got here just in time," the lawman observed dryly. The aftermath of the attack left the barn damaged but salvageable. 2 of Collins' men were dead, including Collins himself. 3 were wounded and captured, and the rest had fled into the night. The marshal assured Daniel they would be hunted down. As dawn broke, Deirdre sat on the porch steps, a blanket around her shoulders, watching the sunrise paint the desert in gold and crimson. Daniel sat beside her, his arm bandaged where a bullet had grazed him. "The stage will be through in 3 days," he said quietly. "I'll have your wages ready." Deirdre nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Daniel, filled her with an unexpected sadness. "Unless," Daniel continued, his voice hesitant, "you've reconsidered your plans." She turned to look at him, her heart quickening at the vulnerability in his eyes. "The school in Taos will have found someone else by now," he pointed out, "and there are children here who could use some education. The nearest school is 30 miles away. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Sutton?" Deirdre asked softly. Daniel took a deep breath. "I'm offering you a reason to stay if you want one." Their eyes held for a long moment before Deirdre smiled. "I believe I do." Over the next month, word spread that the Sutton Ranch was offering schooling. Families from neighboring ranches began sending their children 3 days a week to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic in the small addition Daniel and Miguel built onto the cabin. Deirdre found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease. She loved the wide open spaces, the clean air, and most of all, the growing closeness between her and Daniel. Their evenings together stretched longer, their conversations deeper, and the space between them when they sat by the fire grew smaller. One evening in late autumn, as they walked along the creek that bordered the property, Daniel stopped beneath a cottonwood tree. Golden leaves drifted down around them as he turned to face her. "I've been trying to find the right words," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'm not a man of fancy speech, Deirdre. I've never needed fancy words," she replied, her heart racing as she sensed what was coming. "When I found you collapsed in the dust that day," he continued, taking her hands in his. "I had no idea how completely you would change my life. This ranch was just a place I existed. Now it's becoming a home, because of you." Deirdre squeezed his hands. "It's become my home too." "I want it to be your home forever," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, Deirdre Robbins. Will you marry me?" The answer was as clear and certain as the stars beginning to appear overhead. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." They were married on Christmas Day, 1878, in the small church in Cimarron. Miguel stood as Daniel's best man, and the schoolchildren Deirdre taught formed an enthusiastic, if somewhat disorderly, wedding party. As winter melted into spring, Deirdre and Daniel settled into married life with a happiness neither had dared hope for. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, Daniel expanding the herd, while Deirdre not only taught, but also started a small kitchen garden that yielded vegetables, even in the harsh climate. Their first challenge as a married couple came in late spring, when a severe drought threatened the herd. Water holes dried up, and the creek that had never failed before slowed to a trickle. Daniel worked day and night with Miguel to dig deeper wells and drive the cattle to the remaining water sources. "We'll lose half the herd if the rains don't come soon," Daniel confessed one night as he collapsed into bed, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Deirdre curled against him, offering what comfort she could. "Then we'll start again with what remains, together." The rains finally came in a violent thunderstorm that brought both relief and new problems, as flash floods washed out trails and stranded cattle. For 3 days, Daniel and Miguel rode through the downpour, rescuing stranded animals and repairing washed-out fences. When Daniel finally returned, soaked to the skin and swaying with exhaustion, Deirdre was waiting with dry clothes, hot food, and the news she'd been saving. "We're going to have a child," she told him as he sat before the fire, steam rising from his damp hair. "In the winter." The wonder that transformed his tired face was something Deirdre knew she would remember all her days. He knelt before her chair, resting his head against her still flat stomach, his strong hands gentle as they cradled her. "A child," he whispered, "our child." As Deirdre's pregnancy progressed, Daniel became increasingly protective, insisting on hiring a woman from town to help with household chores and the school. Martha Jenkins was a widow in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner that complemented Deirdre's gentler approach with the children. By autumn, the ranch had recovered from the spring's challenges. The herd was smaller but healthier, and Daniel had used the opportunity to improve the bloodlines with new stock. The school now had 12 regular students, and Deirdre had begun teaching adult classes 2 evenings a week for ranch hands and their wives who wanted to learn to read. The first snow fell in early November, earlier than usual and heavier. Daniel worried about the winter ahead, especially with the baby due in January. He spent weeks ensuring the cabin was thoroughly weatherproofed, the root cellar well stocked, and an emergency supply of firewood kept dry under the porch. "You're fussing like an old hen," Deirdre teased as she watched him check the windows for drafts for the 3rd time in a week. "I just want everything to be perfect," he replied, not at all embarrassed by his attention to detail. "This will be our first child's first winter." Deirdre's labor began during a fierce blizzard 2 weeks before the baby was expected. The snow was too deep, and the wind too dangerous for anyone to fetch the doctor from town. Martha took charge of the birth room while Daniel paced anxiously outside, periodically chopping more firewood despite the substantial pile already stacked by the door. After 14 hours, the thin cry of a newborn pierced the howling of the wind. Daniel burst into the room to find Deirdre exhausted but radiant, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "We have a daughter," she told him, her voice filled with wonder. Daniel approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid his presence might somehow disturb the miracle before him. When Deirdre placed the swaddled infant in his arms, tears tracked unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. "She's perfect," he whispered, gazing down at the tiny face with its shock of dark hair. "What shall we name her, Hope?" Deirdre suggested, "because that's what she is. Our hope for the future." Hope Elizabeth Sutton thrived despite the harsh winter. By spring, she was a sturdy, cheerful baby who delighted in the colorful wildflowers Deirdre brought in to brighten the cabin and reached eagerly for her father whenever he returned from working with the cattle. As Hope grew, so did the ranch and school. Daniel built a proper schoolhouse the summer after Hope's birth, and by her second birthday, Deirdre was teaching nearly 20 children from the surrounding area. The Sutton Ranch became known not only for its quality cattle, but as a center of learning and community in the territory. They welcomed a son, James, when Hope was 3, and the family felt complete. The challenges of ranch life continued throughout years: harsh winters, occasional trouble with rustlers, but Daniel and Deirdre faced each difficulty with the strength they found in each other. On the 5th anniversary of the day Daniel had found Deirdre collapsed in the dust, they rode together to the spot where their story had begun. The landscape looked much the same: the endless sky, the rugged beauty of the desert stretching to the distant mountains. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day," Deirdre mused as they sat side by side on a blanket, watching their children play nearby. Daniel took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I was meant to find you. I believe that with everything in me." Deirdre leaned against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "From desperation to joy," she said softly. "Who would have thought it possible? I knew it from the moment I lifted you from the dust," Daniel replied, kissing the top of her head. "Something in me recognized you even then. As if my soul had been waiting for yours." The years continued to pass, bringing changes to the territory and to their family. New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, by which time the Sutton Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous operations in the region. Hope followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming a teacher and eventually taking over the school when Deirdre decided to focus on other interests. James worked alongside his father, learning the cattle business and introducing modern methods that increased productivity while preserving the land. Daniel and Deirdre weathered the changes together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced the heartaches that life inevitably brings: the loss of dear Miguel to pneumonia, the difficult years of the Great War when James served overseas, the economic challenges of the Depression that followed. Through it all, they held fast to each other and to the life they had built from that fateful moment in the dust. Their grandchildren grew up hearing the story of how their grandfather had found their grandmother collapsed in the desert, lifted her in his arms, and promised her safety, never knowing that he was rescuing his own heart in the process. In the spring of 1928, celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends, Daniel and Deirdre slipped away from the festivities for a quiet moment alone. Though age had silvered their hair and lined their faces, the love that shone between them was as bright and vital as it had been in their youth. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Deirdre asked as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the desert in familiar golds and crimsons. Daniel smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "Safe now," he quoted softly. "You're safe now." Deirdre rested her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his as it had countless times over the decades. "I have been," she whispered, "every day since." As twilight deepened into night, they remained together on the porch, two hearts that had found in each other not just safety, but the kind of love that transforms a life. From a chance encounter in the unforgiving desert had grown a legacy of love, family, and community that would endure long after they were gone. And in that moment, as stars began to appear in the vast New Mexico sky, they were still just Daniel and Deirdre the cowboy and the woman he had lifted from the dust all those years ago, forever grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together on a desolate stretch of desert and changed the course of their lives forever.